Welcome into the Skinny Podcast. It's the weekly potpourri edition. I'm Richard Skinner, Local12.com digital sports columnist and editor with Rick Broering. As always, it's presented by Blake, the attorney Maislin. We got some Bengals to get to, maybe some Reds, I don't know, some college football, which feels like it's been a disastrous start for those of you that follow some of the local teams. We got a betting segment and my favorite segment of the podcast where you can ask me a question on any topic. Just go to the X-verse, hit up the hashtag AskSkinnyAnything. Rick, I'm going to let you start where you want to start because it was a wild and crazy and not so much fun weekend for the locals.
Yeah, the vibes are not good in the Queen City when it comes to football season right now. We'll start with the Bengals, of course. They lost to the Patriots 16-10 on Sunday. They'll take on the Chiefs in Arrowhead Stadium this Sunday at 4:25 p.m. And Skinny, I listened to your post-game recap podcast with Mike Petraglia. I've listened to Mo Egger. I listened to Paul Dehner. I listened to just about everyone. And, I mean, the biggest takeaway I had was the vibes coming out of this game. And I know they've had slow starts. I know there have been different things going on, but for some reason, this felt different than the last few years. The way this one started, the way it went, the issues that they encountered during this first week. Was that the takeaway coming from the stadium, that the vibes were bad inside that locker room and that stadium as well?
Yeah, I think for multiple reasons. The last few I can explain away. You can explain away last year in Cleveland, the rain and Joe Burrow's calf and Joe not having a full camp. And it was just that was kind of a one-off to some degree. And they rallied from that. I mean, when Joe's calf finally got healthy, and I think that was the whole thing, was whenever his calf gets healthy, they'll be fine. And it finally did. They won 4 games in a row, got back in the playoff race, and then he broke his wrist. The year before, he didn't look right? Because he was coming off the appendicitis, had lost some weight, and had his, without question, statistically, his worst performance in the NFL in the opener, throwing 4 interceptions, and losing a fumble, and still almost beating Pittsburgh despite all that. If the long snapper Clark Harris hadn't gotten hurt, so he kind of took that. The next week they got bounced around a little bit by Dallas, and then they really figured things out from that point forward. In 2021 in training camp, Joe even was dealing with the coming back from the knee injury and looked horrible, if you remember, early in camp. And that's all we were talking about and writing about was, is this guy going to get back to normal? And I still remember that it was a Saturday press conference he had in the tunnel. We were still kind of dealing with COVID then. So we did it on, that's when the famous cart was being used. We were in the tunnel, and Joe kind of spoke truth to power of, I got to stop thinking about guys being around my knee and just go play. And after he did, he played fine. And then they went out and won that opener over Minnesota and had a great season. This one, though, is Joe had a full camp. The wrist has been a question mark. We thought it looked good at times in camp. And then all of a sudden we have this dink and dunk performance. Jamar Chase, couldn't play a ton of snaps. Well, he played way more than I thought because he hadn't practiced much. Lo and behold, on Thursday, T. Higgins comes down with another hamstring injury. And here we are again with a wonky start to a season, but it just feels like there's a pall hanging over things at the moment.
Yeah, and I think I hate the term window. Like a team's window is open, it's closing. I don't like using that terminology, but it's something we're all familiar with in sports. It's cliche. We know what it means. So we'll use it now here. Is that part of what's going on here? Is the last few years, the Bengals, like the window was just starting to open. They were just lifting it up. And it's like, okay, everything feels like upside right now. Okay, it might not be perfect. It might not be ideal, but that's okay. They're not quite ready yet. They're just getting to that stage where they're going to be a championship contender. All of a sudden, I think last year it was partly this way, but then you had the Joe Burrow injury that derailed that. This year it's like, okay, now they're a championship contender right now. The window's on its way down. It's starting to close. You're starting to have to pay all these guys. And that's where I think some of the restlessness comes from the fan base. I also think at a certain point, you just get frustrated with this, Skinny. It's like, can this team get off to a reasonable start, especially when everything was working in your favor this year? I mean, obviously you have the contract issues with Jamar Chase, but the Joe Burrow offseason was more normal. And the fact that you had a favorable schedule, especially to start the season. And yet again, we're back in the same spot we've been each of the last few starts to the season.
Yeah, I think what also added to the frustration level was you played a team that's arguably among the whatever number of 5 worst teams in the NFL on paper going into the season. It looked like
they had schedule makers They had the lowest projected win total by Vegas at 4.5 games.
Yeah, I will tell you that defense I thought did play pretty well. They had a good plan, all of those things, and maybe we underestimated that defense. But at the end of the day, when your defense, and they had trouble tackling, which we'll probably get to, your defense only gives up 13 points. Remember, they got 3 on the Charlie Jones fumbled punt. A Joe Burrow offense is supposed to win that game. I mean, there's not even an ounce of doubt in my mind of Joe Burrow. So that's where I think you're left scratching your head going, okay, was that because they fell behind, because of the structure of the defense, that they didn't take deep shots and Joe didn't let it rip? Is it young receivers that he doesn't quite trust. Does he trust Andre Yushavage to come out of the break a certain way where he can lay the ball out to him and know that he's going to be in the spot he's supposed to be? Same for Charlie Jones. I can bring all those up, but then I watch a play with a veteran like Trenton Irwin crossing across the end zone, and Joe's in phase with each other, and he's got two defenders trailing him, and all Joe has to do is just lay it out there for him. It's an easy touchdown. He throws it high and behind him. And listen, I don't need him to be perfect on every throw, Rick, but there just were so many alarming things out of that game when you watch Joe Burrow. And I'm not here to tell you this is going to linger for 17 weeks. It may be 2, 3, 4 weeks when he finally feels 1,000,000,000% and lets it rip. It might be in Kansas City this week for all I know. But what I know I saw on Sunday was not Joe Burrow at full health.
That's right. And there are plenty of things that went wrong in this game. And I'll actually ask you about which you thought, aside from Joe Burrow's play, was the most concerning. But to me, the problem with this team is the same as it ever was, Skinny. If you go back to our podcast last year, people got annoyed with me specifically for talking about the same thing every week. And you know what that thing was that I kept talking about for the first 4 weeks? Quit letting the defense dictate what you do.
It's fair.
Quit running the defense. We took what was their offense. That's what they say after every game early in the season. Well, that's what the defense gave us. We took what was given to us. We took what was there. I heard it from Joe Burrow again after this game that's what was there. That's what the defense gave us. Quit doing that. Make the defense adjust to your best playmakers. Force feed them if you have to, even if it's not quote unquote there. Quit being vanilla Zach and dull Dan Pitcher running this offense. Turn it up a notch. Drive your Lamborghini like a Lamborghini if you've got Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase out there, and use them the way they're supposed to be used. Why does it take till week 5 or 6 to figure that out every single year?
Yeah, I mean, New England, once they got the lead, running a too high zone, and that's fine. That is hard to take deep shots against, but you know what you can do in that? You can take the intermediate shots, and they took literally none of those. Probably the most intermediate shot they took was the ball to Chase in between the linebackers and the safeties that Chase even said, that wasn't a throw that was very good. He said, Joe slowed me down or I would have had a touchdown. He tried to walk it back because I think he realized, oh, crap, I just rolled my man under the bus, and I didn't mean to do that. But he said it. And so to me, that again, the alarm bells go off that a Joe Burrow could let it rip would have probably seen Jamar Chase and let him run between the safeties and laid it out there for him to go. Instead, he took the easy, safe completion, and there's nothing wrong with that. It was a 28-yard gain, for goodness sakes. But it just felt like he was off in that game, and no one wants to address that, it feels like.
It's been the same thing, though, each of the last 2 seasons at least, where you can put it on Joe Burrow or you can put it on the offense, but they start slow. He doesn't look like himself. And then a few weeks into the season, they turn it on, they get going. And I'm confident that will happen again. I'm not actually worried that like Joe Burrow isn't good anymore. The Bengals won't be able to figure this out. But this is now 3 straight seasons. Or you could even go 4 if you want to, although I think it gets a little bit dicey there because I don't think the Bengals were really in a spot to have success early in the season going much farther back than the last 3 years. But at a certain point, Skinny, we have to decide. Is this Joe Burrow's issue? Does he just take a little while to get going? Does he have to see some things, get guys rushing?
That was asked of, that was asked of him in the press conference yesterday, and I think maybe there's some truth to that for whatever reason that maybe he just needs to see things again. And again, it feels like he's adjusting to something every year. This year it's the wrist, and maybe he doesn't trust the wrist in game one of. I see that guy breaking open and I'll throw him open because I've done it in the past, but it never felt like he ever trusted himself to do that. And I get it. I also thought he looked antsy in the pocket, and it wasn't because the pass protection was horrible. In fact, according to NFL stats research, he was pressured on 6 of 29 pass attempts. Now, some of that was because he got the ball out of his hands quickly and checked it down. But I truly think he was afraid of getting hit, then landing on his wrist and having to deal with that. And so I do think there's a lot at work here, both mentally and physically for him at the moment. To your point, is it going to linger? I honestly don't know. I can't assure you that it's not, and I can't tell you definitively that it is, but I just know what we saw.
Let me ask you this, though. Do you feel, and not just this year, you can go back to the last few years as well, do you feel this is more of a Joe Burrow issue or a Zach Taylor / offensive coordinator / play calling issue with the Bengals early in the seasons?
No, I think it's mostly been a Joe Burrow. I mean, if you go back to 21, like I said, the early part of that camp, he was awful, right? And he was really struggling and then, kind of talked himself out of it. And remember, came out winging in week 1 against Minnesota. We can argue they don't win that game if Dalvin Cook doesn't fumble. The Jermaine Pratt doesn't force that fumble of Dalvin Cook, but they still won that game. And he let some passes fly to a rookie Jamar Chase in that game. And so I think that was him at the point of that start of the season, probably healthier than he's been in the last 4 seasons. Then again, the issue with him physically, because of the appendicitis in 22, last year dealing with the calf, he was not right for literally probably the first 4 or even 5 weeks of last season. When he finally got healthy, they rolled off some wins and he was putting up some pretty good numbers. So I think it's been mostly health related. And I think this is health related to a degree.
Yeah, I guess it's just frustrating from a fan's perspective because it's like you want to figure out how you can fix this issue. You don't want to go in. And at this point, it is a legitimate, regularly occurring problem for the Bengals that other teams don't seem to have, that they stumble out of the gates every year. And it's not the starters aren't playing enough in preseason, because most good teams do that.
Exactly.
It's not guys aren't hitting enough in training camp or something like that, because those are league-wide issues. Everyone is dealing with those same things that have changed over the course of the years in the NFL. Like, you don't hit as much, you don't wear pads as much, starters don't play as much because you're paying them too much money. Those aren't unique to the Bengals, and there are plenty of good teams who don't struggle as a result of that they tackled just fine the first week of the season.
The other thing is, and I know when I say this, people are going to scream, well, other quarterbacks make their wide receivers better. But I also think underplayed in this was, I do think there was a big dose of T. Higgins in this game because he'd had a good camp. He was the one practicing. He had evolved into kind of the main guy. And he goes through the first 2 practices, and lo and behold, the second practice of the week, after we talked to him and said he felt great, he comes up with a hamstring injury and can't play. And suddenly now it's, well, he can't play. Jamar's not going to be 100%, so we can't do certain things with him. He hasn't repped a ton of stuff with us yet. Yeah, maybe mental reps and all that, but I think it totally changed whatever game plan there was. And then you're plugging in guys into the spot of T. Higgins and going, well, we can't do that because this guy doesn't do the things that T does. And I think you saw it. I mean, Andre Yoshivasha had 3 catches for 26 yards. Charlie Jones had a catch for 5 yards. Trent Irwin had a catch for 6 yards. Those 3 wide receivers, not named Jamar Chase, combined for 5 catches for like 35 yards. And I truly think that T. Higgins would have been that intermediate guy that Joe trusts, that can go get a 50-50 ball, that can run that corner route and go make a contested catch. And I don't know if he had full trust in those other guys yet or not. And so I think that's actually been underplayed a little bit, that all of a sudden on a Thursday, coming out of a Thursday into a Friday, as a coaching staff, you got to really pivot hard on what you were planning to do.
I guess, but some of it's just philosophical at a certain point, right? Like, regardless of who the receiver is, you got to push the ball downfield a little bit, at least more than they're doing. And
Skinny, but what if the quarterback didn't try? That's where I go back to. What if he didn't? That's why everybody points to the play calling. I don't know if I do. I mean,
so I agree with you. Hold on a second. I agree with you on that. Everyone wants to always say, like, fire Zach Taylor when these stuff, that it's always Zach Taylor's problem. The issue I would have in this case is, it kind of seems like during our conversation here, we agree that Joe Burrow had as many issues as, even if you want to put some of it on the play calling, Joe Burrow was having issues out there too. So I don't know that it was a situation where, like, the play calling is holding Joe Burrow back. And if that's the answer, at the end of the day, if the answer is Joe Burrow is struggling a little bit and Joe Burrow struggles early in seasons, as a Bengals fan, I think we're going to have to accept that. Like, no one wants to get rid of Joe Burrow, right? No one wants to move on from him. So, like, at a certain point, we have to decide, is this Zach Taylor and the play calling, or is it partly who Joe Burrow is too? And if the answer is the latter, then we might just have to live with it to some extent.
Well, but he's still not gone through a full training camp as a fully healthy player other than his rookie year. And I think that's a factor in the equation as well.
Yeah, I do. This was as close to a normal offseason as he's had, though.
As close,
and
you're right.
He looked I'm trying to think of what the right word, because it wasn't like he wasn't sharp. It wasn't like he was the ball looked bad coming out of his hands. I didn't think. It felt like he was uneasy. It felt like he was uncomfortable, or he lacked confidence. And I don't know if that's an issue with the wrist, or if that's something else. But he didn't have T. Higgins out there and he wasn't comfortable with the plays, or maybe this is just how he is early in the seasons. He gets happy feet. He has to feel the pressure and get used to it. I don't know.
Yeah, and listen, the last joint practice with the Colts, I thought he looked good. Did he look 1,000,000,000% great? No, he didn't take any deep shots that day either. But again, they had a third down period, which I think I mentioned. I'm not alarmed if he's not throwing deep balls in a third down period. You're trying to work on plays that get you to the sticks, right? The red zone period, I thought he ripped a couple of passes, threw a one wonky one, then threw an interception where he just kind of threw one up for grabs. And I think in a game he would have eaten that, but in that situation, I didn't think anything of it. Ripped a couple of really nice throws to T. Higgins. But then how do we don't know. I don't know. Nobody, did he have a setback after that? Did it start to bother him? Is there some soreness there? Again, was it mental that he's like, and let's not forget, he had not been hit in a game since Jadeveon Clowney landed on him and broke his wrist until Sunday. And the mental part of that is real, right? That, listen, if I broke my wrist, the last thing I want to do, Rick, is fall on my wrist. And unfortunately, as a quarterback, what happens sometimes? You fall on your wrist. And so I think that's where he wasn't, just like he was, to your point, he was antsy in the pocket. And I think some of that was, I don't want to get hit. I don't want to get hit. I know I'm going to get hit at some point. I just don't, I want to minimize those risks. And so I think it was just a weird, perfect storm of all of that.
I do too. And again, I don't get concerned that like Joe Burrow has lost it or that the Bengals won't recover and play good football this season. But it is a real problem when you're losing to the Patriots in a season where you're trying to stack wins in a really competitive division. So aside from Joe Burrow, because I think we can keep talking in circles about him until we're blue in the face, but at the end of the day, we're not going to get like a clear answer on this yet. We just have to keep going. What part of the loss was most concerning aside from Joe Burrow's play? Was it the fumbles? Was it the offensive line play? Was it the play calling? Was it the lack of tackling? Or was it the lack of pass rush, Skinny? Because when I look at that offensive line New England threw out there, I cannot fathom the fact that the Bengals got 0 sacks from their offense or their defensive front. I mean, they got one from a secondary on a weird play, but nothing from up front.
Yeah, I mean, Trey Hendrickson, I think tied for the league lead this past week in quarterback pressures, and those are all well and good. I think we've talked about that before. The year that they let Carl Lawson walk, it was, but Carl Lawson gets quarterback pressures. Great, that's fine and dandy, man, but get the quarterback to the ground. And I asked Lou Anarumo that yesterday, and he said, no, I mean, he was a tick off, and I trust in Trey. He won a lot of times, and the more times he wins, the more sack opportunities he's gonna finish. And I think that's probably true. I think there was probably a little element of weird luck to that. But to your point, you're right. I mean, the only sack came from Dax Hill for a 1-yard loss. And listen, Jacoby Brissett's obviously very mobile. Their game plan was to get out of his hands. They didn't take deep shots. Their longest play was 17 yards.
But that offensive line was pathetic, Skinny.
It was terrible. I mean, that left tackle, Trey Hendrickson, would whip him literally almost every snap. And at some point, unfortunately, the part that's a bit concerning, and maybe it's, this was what Chris Jenkins was supposed to help, was that Jacoby Brissett, when Trey Hendrickson would come around the edge, could sidestep him and move up just enough in the pocket. That was supposed to be solved a little bit by Sheldon Rankins and B.J. Hill. Lou said yesterday he thought it was mostly rushing lanes more than, not getting push. But I don't know. I thought Jacoby Brissett had plenty of times where he just stepped right up in the pocket, was either able to take off or throw a ball away or find an open receiver. And I think that was, again, supposed to be the thing that we thought was fixed from last season.
Yeah, it was weird because it looked like Jacoby Brissett and Joe Burrow were essentially running the same offense, which is a problem to begin with. Neither one of them are taking any shots. And then Jacoby Brissett looked like the veteran who was managing it properly, and Burrow looked uncomfortable and not confident in his protection holding up. Skinny, what about the 13 missed tackles, though? I mean,
actually 14. Lou told us yesterday, because there's a bunch of different sites have different numbers, right?
Yeah.
And I think the question was phrased that way of, I've seen 10, I've seen 13. I think I said, Pro Football Reference says 13, and he was asked, would you share the number? And he said, well, we're probably a little more critical missed tackles. So they dogged themselves for 14 missed tackles. That is a problem.
But is that a concern?
It's a problem because it was a problem last year. I'm going short term for now until I see it become a pattern. Unfortunately, last year, Rick, it became a pattern. But to your original question, that was an issue. Well, I think part of the problem I think it's an NFL thing to a large degree, because people don't tackle in camp any longer, is you don't know how you're going to tackle till you get in a game and have to go tackle. It felt like they had a lot of hats around the ball. It felt like they hemmed runners in, and all of a sudden a guy would squirt out. And again, it's disappointing. 14 missed tackles is alarmingly high. But even through all of that, they give up 13 points. To me, the thing that I thought was most disappointing was not leaning on the running game, or the lack of success in the first half of the running game. They did get it going there in the third quarter, but eventually you run out of possessions. And once they got it clicked, it felt like it was too late to lean into the run game, because then you were having to throw because time was running short. I'd like to see them lean into that a little bit more this week in Kansas City.
I know you were high on him in training camp, and now we're getting into the season. Where was Chase Brown? Like, I thought, is this going to be another Chris Evans situation? Are they just not going to use the guy at all, or what?
That's a good question. We asked Dan Pitcher that on Monday, and he said, I still envision it being kind of a 50-50 split. It's just kind of the way this game evolved. And that's probably truth. Again, they only had 48 snaps in the football game, for goodness sake. So it's probably hard to get some kind of a decent rhythm going there by sharing the load. I thought we'd see more under center stuff to run some screen game. And that's where the skeptical part of me says, I know people are screaming of, skeptical part of me on that is, again, goes back to Burrow's wrist. Does it hurt him to take a bunch of snaps from under center? I don't know. I honestly don't know the answer
He's
to that.
never liked doing that, though.
Correct. But I thought they were going to lean into, he even admitted, watching what Jake Browning did with that last year and some of the stuff they did off the play action pass game, he really liked. And so I thought they'd lean into that a little bit more. And again, if your wrist is bothering you, you don't want to take too many snaps from under center, and then you become that shotgun team that's fairly predictable. And so again, it was a wonky start that you better fix fast, because now you literally have to go into that Baltimore game 2-2 at the worst. I think if you steal that Baltimore game the first part of October to get you don't steal it, you're winning at home, but you win that game to get to 3-2, that would give Baltimore at a minimum 2 losses because they've already lost the game, and you'd literally be right back in the race. But if you can't finish off this month with a couple of wins over Washington and Carolina, because it's hard to chalk this game up Sunday as a win if they do, truthfully, Rick, it goes back to the thing I do every year in my prediction column. One of my likely wins becomes a loss. It already has. And one of my likely losses becomes a win. And so you would have split the 2 games like you thought you were going to split the 2 games, only split it in a weird, different way. I need to see Burrow be Joe Burrow this Sunday and start feeling better about that.
I think that's how everyone in the fan base feels right now. It's like, I think everyone's willing to accept the fact that Sunday is likely to be a loss and this team is likely to start 0-2. But they want to see the Bengals score 20 plus points,
sure,
see them be competitive in a game, and see Joe Burrow look like Joe Burrow. See Zach Taylor have the confidence in Joe Burrow with 5 minutes left in the game and the ball on 4th and 5 to go for it and give his quarterback a chance, especially when his defense can't get a stop, can't stop the run at all. Things like that. The confidence from this team, this offense, and Joe Burrow is what I think all the fan base needs to see in Kansas City. But Skinny, here's what it's funny because we sit here and you talk about all this stuff and it's easy to get really negative and talk about all the terrible things that went on. But then I also come back to this. The NFL is the NFL, and there's an insane amount of parity. It's not college football where if you lose to a bad team, it's like your season's over and you stink. All these teams are just separated by slight margins. So if the Bengals don't fumble the ball in that game, they win the game. I mean, point blank period. They win that game. They get out of there.
10-point differential.
And then how are we feeling about it? I mean, we feel totally different, and there are still some issues, but the vibes and all the stuff we're talking about that's so terrible and everything so negative changes dramatically if you just find a way to win the game in the NFL.
Yeah, you win ugly, and it was just Joe's got some rust he's got to shake off. And, the missed tackles were bad, but, boy, the defense only gave up 13 points, and, they did just enough to win, and sometimes you got to do that in the league. You're right. I mean, the Charlie Jones fumble cost him 3. Tanner Hudson fumble cost him 7 as he's going in the end zone, and it's a totally different end result, Rick.
Tanner Hudson, what looked like an NBA player who was coming down the lane, trying to hit a Euro step and swinging the basketball over the top of the defender before he's going to finish on the other side of the basket. What in the hell was he doing?
Yeah, I didn't talk to him after the game, but it sounded like he was just trying to reach it across before he got hit, and I think he overthought it. I mean, he's a pretty good. Just tuck that thing away and run over the guy, and if you don't, you're down by the goal line. I think it was a 3rd down play if I'm not mistaken. I think it would have been either 1st and goal or 4th and goal, and you still would have had a chance. But that was a big turnaround.
Yeah, that's safe to say. I mean, watching him swing that ball up in the air, up in front of the defender's helmet and face mask was one of the most insane things I think I've ever seen an offensive player try to do. So Skinny, I guess we'll just end the Bengals segment with this. How much optimism should you have if you're a Bengals fan going into Arrowhead Stadium this Sunday?
I wouldn't say a ton. I mean, now you're dealing with Logan Wilson being on the injury report with a knee. We're taping this before the Thursday practice, and if he doesn't go again today, then I don't know if you'll have him in that game. I would say he had a great game. I thought 13 tackles and didn't have a single missed tackle in the New England game. So
I think
that's cause for concern.
Had it graded as one of his best games ever.
Yeah, no, I thought he was great, and so you come off that performance, and if he doesn't play, I think that's a loss, a key loss. Not going to have T again, and again, what does Joe Burrow look like? I think that's still fair in play to think about what does he look like.
Yeah. All right. Any final thoughts here on the Bengals or the Chiefs game or anything before we move on to college football?
No, but man, this has been like drama central since day one of training camp, bro.
It's been tough. And then you think, okay, we're finally to the season. Let's just talk about the games. We'll get off to a nice start here, and then we'll move on to the big Chiefs matchup. And instead, you guys have just been hit with despair and doom and gloom the entire week after week 1. So
all I know is with a later start on Saturday or on Sunday, it's 3:25 Kansas City time. I'll be enjoying myself Saturday night in Kansas City with a chance to sleep in a little bit.
All right. Well, we look forward to that. We look forward
Yeah.
to hearing about your escapades on the show next week.
There's always escapades.
Sure, you could stop watching now, but let's be honest, you want to see more. So click some of those links, or better yet, go ahead and tap subscribe. That way you'll catch more content from Local 12.